So today, this afternoon, I'll be talking about the challenges of energy and water resources in Southeast Asia. I'm based in Malaysia, one of the countries in the Southeast Asian region. So basically, I'm going to give a brief introduction about the region, Southeast Asia, the energy outlook. I think we cannot talk about climate change without referring to the energy use, and this presents a big challenge for Southeast Asia, the type of energy that we will be engaging on in the future, the energy resources in the area, and of course, water resources in Southeast Asia, which is the impact of climate change, and lastly, climate change impact. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to Southeast Asia. We are a group of 10 countries, and this consists of the countries in the continental margin and offshore archipelagos, which is located south of China and east of Asia. Okay, so I guess that's how we got our name, Southeast Asia. The continental Southeast Asian country comprises Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, whereas the archipelagic Southeast Asia consists of Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines. So these are the 10 countries in the area. And of course, the climate of Southeast Asia is very, very different from what we have here in Alaska. We are hot and wet climate, so we have eternal summer. And the area climate is very much influenced by the monsoon. The monsoon, which is the wind that brings most of the moisture in the area. In terms of land mass, Southeast Asia occupies about slightly more than 3% of the total area in the world, but the population is about 8.6%. So you can see here the map of the 10 countries as listed there. Some are on the mainland Asia and some on the archipelagos of Southeast Asia. Actually, Southeast Asia is a very diverse region in terms of its geography and population dynamics. The most populated area would be Indonesia, which has a population of over 200 million. And the smallest country would be Singapore, which you know is a city nation state. And you can see on the right there, the urban population also varies tremendously from 100% for Singapore, because it's a city-state, to only about 19% in Cambodia and 21% in Laos. So when we talk about Southeast Asia, it's a very varied country in terms of its population dynamics. Now, with respect to the energy use and projection for that area, I think it's going to be a very challenging future because you can see there's very rapid industrialization and urbanization in the area. And along with China and India, which is also undergoing rapid industrialization, it is believed that the energy system, global energy system, will shift towards Southeast Asia and Asia. And energy demand in Southeast Asia has expanded 2.5 times since 1990. And the growth rate is one of the fastest in the world. It has about 600 million inhabitants, and if you look at the per capita energy use is still low as compared to the world average. So we are expecting huge growth in energy use in the region. And it's expected that we will see an increase of 80% of energy use between now and 2035. Which is a rise equivalent to the energy demand of Japan at the moment. And with it, of course, the impact of climate change, carbon dioxide emission will almost double by 2035. And this is spurred by the relative abundance and affordability of coal in the area. Yeah, Indonesia is the largest exporter of coal in the region. And of course, we can also access coal from nearby Australia, which will be much used in the area. And I think the pattern of energy use is also being distorted by subsidies. Many of the countries in the area highly subsidize fossil fuel use, and this is one of the problems that we face of getting more efficient energy use in the area. Unfortunately, in terms of health, over 1/5 of Southeast Asia population still lack access to electricity, and almost half of the population still rely on biomass for cooking, posing a serious risk of premature death from indoor air pollution. You can see here the two columns, population without access to electricity. In Cambodia, for example, 66% still without access to electricity. Of course, the other countries like Singapore, Thailand, and Malaysia are quite well electrified. And population which still relies on biomass for cooking, you can see Cambodia, 88%, and this has been the cause of much poor indoor air quality and lower respiratory tract infection among children in that country and some of the other countries in the region. These are the countries that made up Southeast Asia. The most populated ones are Indonesia, so they have the largest energy usage, but they also export coal, which is the largest exporter of coal in the world. So we do have access to cheap energy resources from coal in the area, and that will be the main energy use in the area. Nuclear power is not yet prominent in the area, but we foresee that Vietnam will go nuclear. Brunei and Malaysia and Indonesia are also producer of oil and natural gas, so that will play a role too in the energy pattern usage in the area. Here you can see the gradual increase of energy production and energy demand, from 1990 to 2011, and most of the energy will come from coal and natural gas, and oil. And hydropower make a small portion of it, and renewable energy in terms of solar energy is not very prominent in the area. So you can see oil, coal, and gas will be the main energy use pattern in the area. Most of it will go into industrial use because, as I mentioned, industrialization is very rapid in the area. Personal transportation is also very high, so we don't have good public transport system in many of the countries. So transport use of energy is also very high, and of course, residential use of energy, electricity. Transportation use of energy and vehicle ownership in the area is also very high, mainly in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. Fuel subsidy, as I mentioned, is one of the reasons why energy use is somewhat distorted because of the cheap supply of energy and the high subsidy which distort the energy economy in the area. Gas, oil, and electricity are quite highly subsidized in many of the Southeast Asian countries. Now, this will lead to high carbon dioxide emission in most of this country. But fortunately, if you look at the diamond shape symbol, it shows that between 2011 and 2035, efficiency will increase. Yeah? This mainly with the new installation of better efficient power plant using, for example, technology like supercritical thermal technology. And there is also probability of engaging carbon capture and sequestration in some of these power plant. Now let us look at the water resources. There are more than 15 river basins draining throughout Southeast Asia. 10 of them are considered as major river basin with drainage area exceeding 30,000 kilometers squared, and most are transboundary. That means they pass through several countries. Of these, 7 are in continental Southeast Asia and 3 are in the archipelago. The longest river in Southeast Asia is Mekong, and it is ranked 12th among the world's great river based on the discharge volume. And it stretches across 6 countries, from the Tibetan Plateau to Vietnam, with a catchment area of almost 800,000 kilometers. You can see Irrawaddy River system draining through Burma, Chao Phraya through Thailand, Mekong through the several countries, and Salween through Burma, and the Red River through Vietnam. Yeah? So it is an area of the region which is traversed by many rivers. The longest is the Mekong, and then we have the Irrawaddy, and with annual discharge of over 10,000 meters cubed per second. And these are also areas that are densely populated because they are being used for agriculture and irrigation. And there are also a few dams that have been constructed across this river for hydroelectricity generation. Okay. So if you look at the Mekong, you can see that it has a huge hydropower potential, especially in Laos, yeah, with a potential generation of 13,000 megawatt. Even though we have a lot of rivers, but there are many rural population in this area without access to improved sanitation and water quality. So you can see, for example, a population with access to improved sanitation. Only Singapore managed to achieve 100%, Thailand 99%, but in areas like Cambodia, only 17% has access to improved sanitation. Improved water sources, countries like Cambodia only have 41%, and Laos 51%. So many of the countries are still without proper sanitation and good water quality. We're doing some work in Cambodia, where the Mekong brings down arsenic from the Tibetan Plateau and is being deposited into the groundwater. The population was using much of the Mekong for drinking water purposes, but that river is quite heavily contaminated with fecal material, so they have resorted to groundwater, but unfortunately, the groundwater contains arsenic and is affecting about 16% of the 14 million population in that area. So water sanitation is still a problem in many of the Southeast Asian countries. And of course, they were asked to use some other sources of of water that is cleaner than the groundwater, but during the dry season, they still have to resort back to use of groundwater. Now, in terms of climate change impact, not much has been done in this area. I'm going to talk tomorrow about the climate change impact on health in Southeast Asia. Basically, one of the main problems we have is doing local prediction, downscaling of climate prediction to the local scenario. We have limited capabilities, so a lot of work still need to be done to look at the potential impact of climate change in the area. But there have been many speculation and talk about the potential impact that this climate change may have in the area. Now, I mentioned about Mekong. It started in the Tibetan Plateau, where the climate, I suppose, is a bit like Alaska. So you have the permafrost layer, and this become a source that can supply water during the drier season. And with climate change, you have the warmer climate may affect this permafrost layer and may result in lower flow during the dry season, affecting the 6 countries that the Mekong is flowing through. The other issues that we may face is rising sea level. Many of the river basin are quite low in altitude, and with the rise in sea level, there is salination of the delta region, which are mainly areas where paddy is being grown. And there is a case in Vietnam where we are seeing an upsurge of a mosquito, Anopheles syndycus, which grows in a saline environment. So it's becoming a more prominent vector for malaria in that area. And flooding is getting more severe in the delta region because of the rising sea level, and this impede the discharge of river water. You can see that Mekong and Irrawaddy has a very huge discharge potential, and so it causes flooding not only in the delta but also in the upstream region because of the impediment to discharge of water into the sea from this huge river system. Okay, in conclusion, it is foreseen that Southeast Asian country will undergo very rapid industrialization and urbanization in the future. As you can see, many of the countries like Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos are actually in the early stage of urbanization and industrialization, and I don't think they will disembark on that purpose. Yeah, so labor is still relatively low, cheap in this part of the world, and we are seeing very huge foreign direct investment coming into the area to make use of the high supply of labor and also the energy subsidies that are being offered by the government. And so energy demand and carbon emission will continue to grow from industrial, transport, and the energy sector. And we do have a supply of cheap fossil fuel, especially coal and gas. Indonesia, Malaysia are producer of oil. Indonesia is producer of coal. Brunei is also producer of oil and gas. So the availability of cheap fossil fuel in the area will spur further development. Major threats are related to warming of the permafrost layer and sea level rise, as I mentioned earlier, which may aggravate flooding and saltwater intrusion in the river deltas. With that, I thank you. And again, it's been nice to be here, and I'm again thank the organizer for inviting me to be present at this conference. Thank you.